Hi, I'm Emily Tesh,
And I'm Rebecca Fremo.
and welcome back to 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones, the podcast where we talk about books by our favourite children's author. This season focused on the book she wrote in the 1970s. Today we're talking about Dogsbody.
Yes, a title with a pun in it, which I was thinking about all the time that I was reading because I don't think that it ever actually registered for me as a kid because I didn't know what a dog's body was. I was
It
just like,
is,
sure, he's in the body of a dog. Right.
yeah, no, perfectly logical. Let's do the plot summary. This is a
Yes.
book about a divinity, wizard, superpower thing. The
Politician?
politician, space politician, the soul or inhabitant of a star, and specifically the star Sirius, who is falsely accused of a crime and, as punishment, sent to Earth in the body of a dog, where he has the lifetime of that dog to
Find a lost item.
find a lost item. There we go. And now we do need to pause. I'm really sorry.
Oh, yes, of course. And this is Rebecca from the future, noting that this is the point where we were joined on the recording by M's daughter.
Has nothing to add on Dogsbody. She hasn't read it because she's 5 months old.
But this is, as we've been talking about, in a way, a book about parenthood, good and bad, as all of Diana Wynne Jones's books are books about parenthood, good and bad. So this is, I think, sort of fitting.
Yeah, no, you have a point. God knows, I hope I'm not as bad a parent as the bad parent in Diana Wynne Jones. She is consistent. And this book in particular is really interested in fatherhood, motherhood, parenthood, all the ways it can go wrong.
And also about, I think it's very interesting that it is interested in all these different kinds of relationships, despite the fact that the central relationship, which I don't think we've yet touched on in the plot summary, is basically a classic girl and her dog story.
Right.
One of the things that Diana Wynne Jones says about this book, when she's sort of talking about her difficulty with writing female protagonists in her early books, which is something both kind of externally and I think internally induced. She talks a bit about the difficulty with getting boys to read girls' books, which things are considered to be a girls' book if they have a girl protagonist. But she also talks about her difficulty with writing protagonists that feel too close. And so one of the things that she says about this book is, I sneaked a female hero past in Dogsbody by telling the story from the dog's point of view. So in one way, the protagonist of this book is Sirius, the exiled dog. And in another way, it's the little girl who finds him, who is living out her own problem novel.
Right. We've talked before about how, especially these early Diana Wynne Jones books, are very affected by the 1970s sort of milieu in which they're written and the expectation that children's literature needs to be about problems which are then explored meaningfully in the book. So that you can then really ruin children's lives by being like, no escapism for you. Here's a book about the problem you are having. And so this stealth protagonist of Dogsbody, who is also a dog's body because she is Cinderella, so she's being used as the dog's body of the family. But her name is Kathleen O'Brien, and she is living with this family that hates her in the context of the early 70s. She is an Irish little girl whose father has been arrested as part of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and she has been sent to live with English family who treat her very badly.
Now, when we first looked at the list of books from the 70s, I think the first thing you said to me was, oh my god, this is a lot of books about the Troubles, which we'll get to this more, I think, in later books, but I knew that this one was about the Troubles. I couldn't sort of miss the word Ireland when I was reading this as a kid. But this is the point where I come in and am the classic clueless American, because when I was 12, I just had no context for this.
See, that's interesting to me because I should say that I am from an Irish and, in fact, a Northern Irish family. My grandmother was from Belfast and my grandfather was from Dublin, and they got married in the 50s and then immediately moved to Japan so they wouldn't have to talk about politics. Her sympathies were firmly unionist and his were firmly nationalist. So it was a doomed relationship. So they had 7 children.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But some of my memories from like my childhood in the 90s are sort of driving through Belfast and Derry on our way to visit my grandparents, and my very English father putting on an Irish accent at the checkpoints that we drove through, because he did not feel safe driving through Ireland as an Englishman with his wife and children in the car, because it was a very dangerous time. And Jones is writing Dogsbody in the early 70s. I think it's from 74 or 75, published in 75. And this is actually the worst and bloodiest period of the Troubles, the undeclared civil war in Northern Ireland between the nationalists, who always argue that they are a republican anti-colonial movement, not a religious sectarian movement, and the Unionists, who are very much a religious sectarian movement,
Uh-huh.
an anti-Catholic movement. And it is a really, really painful period in Ireland's history. It's a period with a lot of knock-on effects, and the early 70s was the bloodiest part, because in August 1971, the Northern Irish government, with the support of London, brought in internment, which is arrest and imprisonment without trial for people suspected of IRA involvement.
And this book is also being written shortly after not this the sort of civil war has been brought specifically into England, where Diana Wynne Jones is living at this time. You know, the violence in Ireland has been increasing throughout the 70s at this point, but I believe it's in 1973 when the sort of famous bombing incident happens in London.
The first one, yeah. There are several.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but this is one of the things the Troubles did was they very much brought home to England some of the consequences of sort of colonial oppression in a way that I think a lot of English people have been able to ignore for a very, very long time. The IRA always claimed that they were targeting legitimate military targets in a struggle for freedom. Uh, it is possible to argue sometimes with that. There were certainly plenty of civilian casualties along the way. So I am trying so hard to be fair-minded, because literally this is like a family history of this
Uh-huh.
exact argument that you
Yeah.
didn't bring up at dinner at Christmas.
Thank you for being willing to also bring it up on the podcast. And I do think, to give Jones credit, I was sort of braced rereading this book as an adult because I hadn't read it since I was a kid. And I think that she does show kind of, for an English person living throughout this conflict in the 70s, she's incredibly sympathetic to Kathy's
Oh no,
situation.
she is
Kathy is
shockingly not just sympathetic to Kathleen, the protagonist, who has, by the way, possibly the most cliched Irish name imaginable.
oh my god,
It's right
so
up
true.
there with naming the dog Seamus, which her cousins try to do as a racist joke against Irish people.
Yep.
But yeah, she's Kathleen. She's Kathleen O'Brien. It's noticeable the narrative is very, very sympathetic to her, but it's also sympathetic to her imprisoned father.
Right, and you can tell how sympathetic it is to her imprisoned father by way of the fact that her imprisoned father is a deliberate parallel to our actual protagonist, Sirius the dog star, who is imprisoned. It's the word is used over and over again. There are, numerous quotes where he's talking about sort of the horrors of this particular imprisonment, and also a number of sort of lesser but equally significant indignities as a dog, where he's imprisoned in the backyard, he's imprisoned in the house, he's stopped from doing anything he wants.
Right.
The things that will actually save his life, because if he doesn't find this magical artifact that he's looking for by the end of the book, then he's just going to die as a dog.
Right, and it is interesting, because I feel like explicit sympathy for the IRA is a fairly unusual position for an English author in the 1970s to take. Like, it's still a fairly unusual position in England now, certainly among the older generation who lived through the worst of, like, the period when the IRA was using terrorist tactics to make their point.
Right. And there's I think the quote that I wanted to pull out is after he's been confined to the backyard by Kathy's evil. She's not a stepmother, she's a guardian, but she's basically an evil stepmother, who says that, Kathy's dog, whom she hates, has to stay in the backyard while Kathy's at school, can't come in the house, can't leave. And Kathy says, who's
Kathleen.
named Sirius Leo. Kathleen, sorry. Kathleen says, "Poor Leo, you're a proper prisoner now." And Sirius saw that she was crying. He was surprised because these days Kathleen rarely cried. And you can see that Kathleen is also making this connection between her dog, who's tied up in the backyard.
Her dog and her dad, which is what we'll come
her
back
dog.
to in many
Yes.
ways. So right, this is a problem book in the sort of 70s mold, but the problem is that your father has been arrested for terrorism, which is actually not a hugely common problem that many children need to deal with. And also, I'm not sure the book does deal with the problem in the way that a problem book perhaps is supposed to. There isn't a good answer.
There's no resolution. I mean, I think the book kind of teases resolutions to this. All throughout the book, Kathleen has this dream that her father is going to get out and come get her. And there is a point, sort of midway through the book, where it seems like he's escaped. You know, well, first she gets a letter from her father saying, "Don't worry, I'm going to come get you and rescue you from this miserable family." And that seems like what the happy ending is going to be. She's going to hold and endure this situation, which let's set this situation up a little bit. So she has been taken in by a relative of her mother's, Mr. Duffield, and his wife, and their 2 children. And as in the classic Cinderella story of the 2 children, there's sort of a cruel older child who is, at first, the main lens. He and his mother are the main lens through which we see the racism that Kathleen is experiencing. And then a useless but kinder younger child who's quite fond of Kathleen, but is also the smallest kid in the family and can't do anything, and is sort of subject to the will of his older brother and his mother. The father is around, is useless as well, sort of vaguely means well towards Kathleen, but is not willing to notice any of the actual difficulties that she's going through.
Doesn't like things that make him uncomfortable, and rather than fixing things, he just arranges his life so he never has to see anything that makes him uncomfortable.
Exactly. And there's actually kind of an interesting echo of the ogre downstairs, where Kathleen also has to do all the housework. The adults, so presumably Mrs. Duffield, who everyone calls Duffy, her job is to make horrible artisan pots. And presumably at one point she did take care of the household. At the very beginning of the book, Kathleen finds Sirius, Leo, as a small, mostly drowned puppy, and sort of begs and begs to be able to keep him and raise him. And Duffy, and as part of her begging to keep him and raise him, she says, "I'll do all the cooking, I'll do all the cleaning, I'll do all the housework as long as you let me keep this dog." And Mrs. Duffield is like, "Great, fantastic," and immediately holds her exactly to the letter of it. Kathleen is a child. She doesn't know how to cook. She doesn't know how to clean. There's, numerous instances in the book of her burning the roast and breaking something while trying to clean it.
The Christmas dinner
and
that she can't do. But the fact that also the child was expected to make a full Christmas dinner. And this is one of the moments where Mr. Duffield actually says something, but all he says is, "You could have done it yourself." He doesn't say, "Please stop abusing this child and making her do all the cooking."
He's sarcastic about it. There's sort of a Mr. Bennett quality to him almost, where he's sarcastic about the problems that he observes in the rest of the family, but he will not step in, he will not change them, he will not exert his authority. What Sirius thinks about Mr. Duffield is Mr. Duffield meant well, but he was too wrapped up in himself to attend to what other people felt. It took a policeman to make him notice anything was wrong, and now he seemed to be making matters worse. He was the most self-centered creature Sirius knew, apart from Duffy, his wife.
And that's extremely funny, because what becomes increasingly clear is that Mr. Duffield and Sirius are actually the 2 parallel characters.
Yes. There's this very, very funny trick that Diana Wynne Jones does, where Sirius gets to be a parallel both of Kathleen's real father, who's imprisoned, and of Kathleen's surrogate father, this sort of useless adult, both at the same time. What we know about Sirius right from the start, and this is why I think so again, when I was young first reading this book, I didn't pay any attention at all to the star politics plot. I did not care. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the star politics plot. And one of the first things that we learn about Sirius when he's on trial for his life. And so there's a trial, the court is bringing in charges, and says the court has found you guilty on 3 counts, namely of murdering a young luminary stationed in Orion, of grossly misusing a Zoe to commit that said murder, and of culpable negligence causing trepidation, irregularity, and damage in your entire sphere of influence and leading to the loss of the Zoe. Now, we know that he did not do the first thing, the murder. The entire book is about proving that he didn't do the murder.
I mean, not proving it
and that he
exactly,
didn't
because
use...
it's actually clear from very early on that Sirius not only didn't do the murder, but knows who did.
True. Yes.
He could easily
point.
save himself, and the reasons he chooses not to are interesting, I think. So, I mean, this book has a few themes. One of them is that parents are terrible. Another is that death is terrifying. But the third and most important is that sex makes you stupid.
It makes
Children's
you
book,
so
remember.
stupid. But we can't blame him. We'll get to the sex. But I don't think we can blame the sex on his culpable negligence causing trepidation, irregularity, and damage in his sphere of influence.
That's all Sirius.
We never hear him. That's all Sirius. And later in the book, you know, one of the other major characters that we haven't talked about yet is Sirius befriends the son, who's sort of shocked to find Sirius, who is his boss, hanging out in the body of the dog, running around.
Right, I mean, Sol is also furious. Sol on his star politics thing is like, I can't believe they did this to me. I have so much going on here. I have so many irons in the fire. Last thing I need is my boss being a dog in my back garden while I'm working on something. But Sol is so responsible.
Right.
That's clear from very early on. Sol is very responsible and active as like a star. As opposed to Sirius, who is irresponsible.
And if you are one of Sol's creatures, then Sol will protect you and take care of you. And Sirius is now one of Sol's creatures. There's sort of this weird office comedy in the background of this book where your boss has become like your intern in a way, and now you've got to run around because the new boss has come in and he's trying to meddle. And there's a really interesting line here, again, when we're talking about the parallels between the star politics plot and perhaps contemporary politics. I don't want to give Diana Wynne Jones too much credit. This line can be read, you know, sort of a lot of ways, but Sirius has been replaced by a new sort of come-lately star, and Sol is deeply annoyed about this, and it soon becomes clear that the new Sirius is meddling in ways that are quite bad for the entire domain. Sol says it's just as well they didn't trust that amateur on his own. He set up some kind of trepidation that's almost knocked my outer planet off course, and the next thing I know, there were floods, droughts, and famines all over Earth. And what Sirius thinks about... So this new star is someone from Castor, and Sirius doesn't know much about people from Castor except that they were vague and untrustworthy and too many for their sphere, so that they were always trying to meddle with other people's.
If we're talking about anti-Irish racist stereotypes, that's one of them.
That's true. But if you flip that, if Sirius is... So there's a book of Diana Wynne Jones's that we're not reading called Changeover, because I think it's probably quite bad. It was her first book. It was written about... it's sort of a comedy about an African nation, a made-up African nation, achieving independence. I don't think in any way that Diana Wynne Jones was qualified to write about an African nation achieving independence, and I don't really want to see how badly she got it. But it does sort of indicate to me that at least she was thinking a little bit about the problems of foreign governments, of being governed from a central location that doesn't know what it's doing, perhaps, in their particular location.
Yeah, I will give you that. I think I don't want to give Diana Wynne Jones too much credit on this one either. I think the star politics plot is kind of in the background and mostly played for comedy. The serious stuff in this book is all the death, sex, and animal cruelty.
That is also very true. All of that is happening all the time. Well, speaking of death, one of the other things that you mentioned, I think, in the notes when we were talking about floods, droughts, and famines, is that people are starting to hear about climate change.
I mean, it's just a throwaway reference. There's not much to put in it, but it is interesting to me that Jones is constantly putting what's contemporary and immediate into her fantasy books. So we've got the political situation in Ireland, we've got the sort of early discussions of climate change, and they're all just in there alongside these like quite strange and symbolic elements. As usual, I've skipped to the ending. I'm not going to skip to the ending. I'll stop that.
Right, we're not going to do the ending yet, but I do think that it's relevant also in that there's kind of a doom hanging over this book. There's a death hanging over this book. We know that Sirius is under a time limit from the moment that he enters Earth. He is a dog. He's going to have a dog's lifespan. Um,
He's going to die. Dogs do
yes,
die.
he almost dies
And that,
immediately.
yes, oh god, and that opening sequence, right? He arrives on Earth, he wakes up as a puppy, and we see like this powerful and dangerous character from the first chapter has immediately been sort of replaced, remade into this very blind, this very incapable, and this very unknowing little scrap of life. And because puppy Sirius can't remember what he was, like brain's not big enough to contain the personality
Right.
of a star. And so we have this sort of opening scene that describes, the hairy cliff that is the mother dog's body. And then the humans who come in with their power of life and death over what's helpless, what's defenseless, what's innocent. And they have this discussion, are these puppies worth anything? No, because they're a mongrel
Right,
litter.
they're the wrong kind of puppy.
Right, Bess has been a very naughty girl, is what one of the characters says.
Which is also a direct parallel between Sirius and Kathleen.
And then sorry, baby wishes to contribute. The other human figure, whom we'll come back to, persuades the dog owner that puppies need to be drowned, and they're thrown into a sack, and the sack is thrown in the river. And it is an excruciating sequence. It's really hard to read. The description of these 7 puppies all fighting for life, fighting against
little
the river.
Scraps of life, I think, is what she calls them.
Yeah, and let me grab the whole quote. It's really, really, it moved me. Where have I put it? I've lost
the
the
one
quote.
About how he fought the darkness and cold as if it were a live enemy.
Yes.
Soon, only Sirius was scratching and tearing at the dark, and he only kept on because he had a dim notion that anything was better than cold nothingness.
Yes, that's the bit I was thinking of, and the way it refigures or sort of replays the Sirius in the first chapter, where he's down there through the spinning star motes of the floor. He looked into nothing. He was horrified. It was all he could do not to scream at them, not to make him into nothing. This idea of becoming nothing, and that's what death is. It's true for the star as it is for the puppy.
And then what life is, there's a subsequent quote that says, when he hears the sentence that condemns him to become a dog's body, he says, it was worse than nothing because it condemned him not only to exile, but hope. Hopeless, brutish hope over a whole uncertain lifespan.
Right, it is dark. Your choices are nothingness or hopeless hope.
And I think that she's, this idea of hopeless hope, that living in hope of something that you don't think will ever happen is worse in a way than immediate death. I think that's something that we'll see Diana Wynne Jones come back to.
Absolutely. But I think it is also it's a description of Kathleen's situation, where she's sort of trapped in this miserable, miserable life, and the very, very slim hope that her father might come and get her is all she's got. And it's a very slim hope indeed. And, sorry, I will need to parent for a second. You're okay,
She's okay,
you're a baby. She is so good. You're one of nature's podcasters,
Absolutely.
I can tell.
She's grabbing already for the headphones. She's ready to put them on and start going. So speaking of babies, when we're going back to this parenting theme, I think one of the things that you pointed out is that Kathleen then becomes a mother figure to Sirius. When she fishes him out of the river, she bottle feeds him.
Right, she gives him his milk. She raises him from very, very, very early puppyhood, too young to be taken from his actual dog mother, who is a character we will meet again later in the story. And Sirius has absolutely no reaction or response to Bess the dog. His interest, his mother is Kathleen, his mother figure, and she is this I'm gonna go here. She is the virgin mother.
100%.
Okay? She is. The book is very careful not to explicitly say whether Kathleen is on the Catholic or Protestant side of the divide in Northern Ireland, but she's a Catholic. She really is. And the description of her as having boundless love for all living things, Sirius's deep resentment of her boundless love for all living things, because he's jealous.
Profound jealousy in this book, which also gets at some of these themes about sex. Do we want to talk about the companion now?
Let's talk about the companion. She is, I think, the only major character we haven't mentioned. So this is, of course, Jones does actually, know her stuff about the star. So the dog star Sirius does have a small white dwarf companion star. And the companion is the luminary, the divine or heavenly figure which inhabits this sphere and is Sirius's companion romantically, sexually. It's not quite clear how luminaries arrange these matters, but it's really clear from very early on, from the first chapter, he's got immensely strong feelings for her. He adores this woman.
He'll do
figure.
anything for her.
And indeed, he does, because actually, it is eventually revealed that the person responsible for the murder is almost certainly the companion. And Sirius's refusal to say that in a life or death trial is him literally prepared to die for her. And the fact that the judges figure out there's something up and then send him to this weird sentence of go and be a dog instead is always aimed at trying to tease out the truth of who is the real murderer, who is the real monster in Sirius' sphere. So the companion is the villain of the piece.
And she's explicit. Well, there's two villains of the piece. There's the companion and there's Mrs. Duffield. And they are explicitly paralleled because everything in this book is paralleled 2 or 3 times.
This is Jones's great trick, right? This is what she's so good at, and it's why even in very short books you get a kind of sense of depth of character, because every character tells you something about all the others. So the more time you spend with Duffy, the more you know about the companion. The more time you spend with Kathleen, the more you know about parenthood, womanhood, motherhood.
Although I think that there's, again, I'm really glad that we decided not to skip the ogre downstairs, because I think there's something really fun in looking at Kathleen and in Ginny. Both of those are two little girls who have been sort of pushed into a mother role, who are paralleled to a mother role, but are not quite good at it yet. We see Kathleen overfeeds Sirius. He throws up. She's overcooking, she's breaking things, she's been pushed into a mother role before she's ready to be one. And I think the book is pretty clear that this is not necessarily a role that she ought to have, but it's a role that she has to have because no one else is doing it.
Right. So because she has this sort of boundless love, because she is a good person, and then, like, this is Kathleen's main character trait, is she is a very good person. In a way, I think that I would find quite annoying if she was actually the protagonist. But because it's all modulated through Sirius's point of view, and of course he adores her. He's her dog.
He has unconditional love for her. He's the only being in the world who has unconditional love for Kathleen. Although eventually, to go along with this mothering theme, because she's so good and because she's willing to have unconditional love for other creatures, the 2 boys in the household who, they're also eating her food and living in the house that she makes. And over the course of the book, they become more...
They change sides.
They become more her children than their actual mother's children.
Right, because to begin with, both of them, especially Basil, the older boy, both of them are Duffy's children. Basil is cruel and makes nasty jokes to Kathleen.
Racist jokes, incredibly racist jokes.
Right. Robin doesn't stand up for her because he wants his mother to approve of him, and it is clear that they are getting the nastiness, the anti-Irish feeling from Duffy, who... What's the quote? What she says about Irish people?
Oh, God, it's awful.
It's not even the worst stuff in the book.
Oh,
Duffy disliked Irish people. She called them feckless. She called Kathleen lazy and stupid and sluttish.
In particular, is such a particularly awful thing to call, like, a 10-year-old.
I will say this is probably sluttish in the sense that my mother used it to me when I was a child, which is to say dirty. As in making a mess everywhere, rather than the contemporary use of slut as a sexual criticism. It's still a really nasty thing to say to a 10-year-old. But my mum did say it to me when I was 10, and at that particular time I had, in fact, made a mess everywhere.
And Kathleen does make a mess everywhere frequently, or rather Sirius makes a mess everywhere frequently, and then Kathleen takes the blame for it.
Kathleen gets
because
the blame.
She is the dog's body, as for Sirius in the dog's body.
Yeah, but also, like, Kathleen is being blackmailed because Duffy holds Sirius's life over her. If at any point Kathleen just does something Duffy doesn't like, Duffy threatens to kill her dog. Like, I'll take that dog down to the vet.
And because we've seen what...
And this cruelty, it's cruelty to animals, right, which is the clearest sign of someone just being evil.
And
in this
Sirius
book.
learns through being in the dog's body. He learns to recognize when someone's going to be cruel. There are a couple instances through the book. Eventually, he's able to sneak out of the backyard and go around begging food from various people. And he learns very quickly to identify people who feel like Duffy, people who are just kind of feel bad, people who are cruel, people who are not going to be kind to animals. And then when he finally meets the companion again, because she's come down to Earth to make sure that Sirius is really dead.
Because she was actually that other figure who persuaded the dog owner to drown the puppies back in chapter 2. And that reveal hits and you're like, oh yeah, she's been here all along. She's always hated him. She has always been trying to murder him.
Immediately, so Sirius's reaction is Sirius wanted to wag his tail and whine with joy. He wanted to go down on his fringed elbows and lick her elegant feet, and then put his paws on her small shoulders and lick her face, but he did nothing. He just stood there for age-long seconds staring at her, unable to credit what all his green nature and his dog nature had learned while he had been on Earth. He had met people like her while he begged at doors. One of them had kicked him. He knew Duffy, but she could not be like Duffy. She was his companion. And then to think he had spent long, long ages doting on a being like Duffy. And all that he needs to say is that, basically, she's like Duffy. That's all you need to know.
Right. And it's that sort of, it is that Jones thing of the move smoothly from the everyday and normal sphere up and I can speak, up and out to the mythic, the spectacular, because Duffy is such a normal human kind of person, such a nasty, petty bully. And it's really well done. It's very detailed. Duffy's cruelty is calculated. She doesn't do it in front of her husband. She doesn't do it in front of her friends. So when her friends turn up to her pottery shop and they admire the dog because he's a big, handsome creature, Duffy suddenly switches from being horrible about Sirius to being quite smug and proud about him, because she's only interested in status and power. And she is very calculated about how she makes sure she gets it. And actually, I think she is, the awful mother figure turns up in Diana Wynne Jones
almost every book.
Like a lot. But Duffy is, I think, a particularly strong example. But what's interesting is the way that Duffy and the companion are paralleled. They are very similar characters, except that the companion is beautiful. She is attractive. Yes. Whereas Duffy is always described by Sirius as how much he hates her fat pink legs.
Her horrible legs and her blocky feet. Because that's all you can see, because he's a dog. He's just a
because he's a dog. Right, but then that then gives you the parallel between Sirius and Mr. Duffield, this stepfather, this uncle of Kathleen's, why is he doting on a being like Duffy?
We don't know. We have known nothing about their relationship, except what we know by seeing it paralleled with Sirius and his companion, and except what we know about the fact that Sirius has been oblivious to his responsibilities because he's been so busy doting on his companion that he hasn't been doing his job.
Right. There's a sense of not seeing what you don't want to see, and I think there's a third point in this triangle, if you like. So there is Duffy, the horrible, evil stepmother. There's the companion, this beautiful, monstrous star, and point 3 is Patchy,
yes.
who is a bitch. Not as in a nasty person, as in she is literally
She's
a female dog.
Sweet. She's just not very smart.
Right, Sirius meets her early on, and Sirius is instantly interested in her because she looks like him, and it does turn out she is one of the other puppies who was nearly drowned alongside him. So Patchy looks like Sirius, and he wants to be friends, and all she can say is hello. And he realizes she's one of the stupidest creatures he's ever met, and he's very disappointed, and he goes off and doesn't want to think about her again. But later on, he comes back and Patchy is suddenly interested.
Interesting to all the dogs in the neighborhood.
So interesting. Every single male dog who can get loose is sitting outside the gate waiting to say hello to Patchy. And Sirius, even though he has an urgent quest to find a lost magic item, is I've got to sit down here and wait.
There's nothing else to be done.
Because she's an he. Sirius simply doesn't have a choice. His dog nature insists that he needs to be with Patchy. Somehow, anyhow. And there's quite a funny sequence of Luminary Soul getting frustrated with him and what are you doing? Why are you there? That's a random stupid dog.
I think that two more lines of parallel. I realize that I'm drawing sort of this, at this point we're getting very red string. But
a star. We're drawing a
yes,
great big
we're drawing
star.
a great big star. When we're talking about parenthood in this book, and we're talking about responsibility in this book, and sex and death, what I was going to say is that we have another pair of parental figures in this book. We actually have several parental figures in this book.
So there are so many parents in this book.
I'm going to escalate. I'm going to start low-key first because I think this is a very funny parallel to all the bad mothers in this book. We have Tibbles, who is the cat of Sirius's household, whom...
She is the companion, as well.
In fact, she's explicitly compared to the companion. And at first, Sirius hates her because dogs, cats, etc. The cats hate the dog hates the cats. He's profoundly jealous over Kathleen. The cats used to snuggle with Kathleen, who was the only person in the house who was kind to them, until Sirius chases them away. And, like the companion, they set up a trap for Sirius to get him in trouble and get him executed. They're, in fact, explicitly paralleling the attempt to get him condemned for murder. But it doesn't work, because they're cats, and Sirius is sort of a god, and therefore smarter than they are. And so he is able to easily see through their trap, at which point the cats get in trouble, and Sirius rescues them. He comes to their defense because he doesn't want to see Duffy abusing the cats. This is quite clearly pretty terrible animal abuse. And then after that, they hang out together. And once they start hanging out together, Sirius is able to appreciate how beautiful Tibbles is. And when he thinks about his companion, he calls her as small and white and nearly as elegant as Tibbles.
Beautiful white cat. And she is, of course, a mother. She's the mother of the other two cats, who are called Romulus and Remus. And she is a companion figure. And she is a scheming potential murderess. But also she's a lovely cat.
She has an affectionate nature. And she is one of the only two beings in this book who is explicitly described as more beautiful than the companion. So, you know, if romance is getting you down, you could try getting a cat. We love it when they're murderous. It's very cute and charming. But the other sort of escalating up from Tibbles, the best mother and perhaps the second best mother in the book. The best parents in the book, I think, are Soul and the Earth, the sun and the ground. We see the sun mostly, or we see Soul throughout the book, trying to help Sirius, getting very annoyed when Sirius will not go out and help himself and is instead stuck sitting at the gate of a very stupid dog in heat for a week. But Soul is consistently deeply concerned about his creatures in, I think, a very parental way. When the companion comes down to Earth, Soul immediately intervenes, politely, politically, but with utmost scorn. And she's trying to argue that she has the right to kill this one particular dog. She says, "To blazes with you and your creatures, they're not important." And Soul says, "A correction, Effulgency. Everything in my sphere is important to me." So somehow Soul is able to effectively care for everything, which no one else in the book has demonstrated an ability to do.
Right. But Soul is as well proud. He's got that proud parental feeling about Earth, especially. There's that great bit at the end where Soul sort of sideways asks Sirius, "So, what do you think of Earth then?" And she's like, It's a masterpiece. But Sol is very smug about how good Earth is. And he has this sort of, he's also jealous.
Much in the same
Earth.
way that Sirius is jealous about his companion, jealous about Kathleen as well.
Right. This kind of father-husband jealousy, where you're like, is it meant to be parental or romantic? It's really not clear. It appears to
definitely
be both. Which we will come back to in future books.
And eventually, Soul does get to meet Earth and sort of comes to the realization that, or Sirius does get to meet Earth and sort of comes to the realization that Soul has been kind of keeping Sirius from Earth. Out of this kind of jealousy and protectiveness, Soul doesn't really want Sirius talking to Earth. But eventually, when hiding from his murderous companion, Sirius crawls into a hole in the ground, and
in like a real return to the womb sequence there.
And a creature starts talking to him, and at first he thinks it's whatever lives in the hole in the ground. And the creature starts asking about the companion. Is she, she's so beautiful. Is she as beautiful as Sol? And Sirius is like, well, I guess they're very different. Is she more beautiful than the moon? And Sirius sighs and hasn't seen the moon often, but he knows the moon is just kind of a dead white thing. He says, oh yes, he could tell the creature was not at all pleased to hear this, so he tried to explain in terms it would understand. Put it like this, she is more beautiful than the moon, about the same as Sol, but nothing like as lovely as that meadow with the flowers out there. And the voice in the ground is thrilled to hear this. Because, of course, the voice in the ground is Earth, who is the meadow, and who is the ground, and who is the parent of everything on the Earth, everything on the planet. I don't say mother, because specifically not a mother. Very, very interestingly, Sirius asks, are you male or female? And Earth answers, I have no idea. I've never considered it.
I do like that moment. I do think Earth sort of comes across as a mother figure in parallel to Kathleen, in that firstly there's the whole sequence where Sirius crawls into a hole in the ground,
happen.
and it is and it does feel symbolically like a return to the mother. He'll then also, after meeting Earth, does immediately meet the actual inhabitant of the hole, which is a mother fox,
very
a vixen.
protective of her cubs, and Sirius tries to go over and make friends, and the vixen's like, you cannot do that. I do not want them learning that dogs are friendly. Dogs are not friendly. Not if you're a fox cub.
Right. Especially not in England in the 70s, because this is before fox hunting was outlawed.
But I do think that it's interesting and kind of fun that despite these very, very clear mother parallels, mother imagery, the fact that, like a mother, she's very protective of the last figure of this book that we haven't talked about, who I think we're going to get to quite soon. She's not, Diana explicitly avoids gendering Earth. And in a way, I think, Sol is more of a father figure than a mother figure, but you get, I think she does want to destabilize that a little bit.
I think you're right, yes. Sol is he, so it gets male pronouns. But again, is not the same as a human mother and father. Yes. That's really, really clear. At the same time, though, it does have like that sort of mythological, like gods feeling of, the earth and the sun came together and brought forth life. I think that is really
what we're intended to read into the situation. These are the parents of everything on Earth. Earth is the partner of Sol more than Earth is Sol's child, but also kind of Sol's child.
Yep. Father, husbands.
In much the same way as eventually we're going to get with Sirius and Kathleen. But I don't think we're quite ready to talk about the end yet, because first we do have to talk about the death thread a little bit more. So when Sirius is on the loose, running around, looking for other different, looking for the secret of the lost, it's really such a MacGuffin, the Zoe. It's a magical artifact. We don't know anything about it. It can look like anything. It's very powerful. It really doesn't matter what it is.
You do get a sense you're not meant to be able to understand what it is. That it's something that's like way above the level of anything that's ever been born on Earth. Even Sol.
Yeah, and I don't want to. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to deal with it. It's too big and too powerful for me. But while he's running around, he finds not just Patchy, but also a collection of other dogs who all kind of look like him, who are all his lost siblings, who many of whom did survive and were adopted by other families, and one of whom actually has interesting things to say. And that one, Bruce, the only one of his sort of litter of siblings is intelligent for a dog, mentions that he's been out and seen, and I think Sirius actually meets one of these other dogs as well.
Well, yes. Because it's in fact his father. This is another parental pair we haven't actually talked about. The mother and father dog, the parents of the body, the dog's body, and because one thing that becomes interesting is that the dog body is as magical, as mythic as the star inhabiting it. It's connected to a completely different strand of myth and power that Sirius has no idea about.
And when he sees that dog had no interest in him, completely disavows him. It's a strange, cold hound with red ears. And eventually he learns that every so often these hounds go on a hunt. And perhaps Sirius and his sibling dogs, who look more or less enough like these strange, cold dogs that they can sort of blend in at a first glance, could join this hunt if they try really hard and sort of push themselves to the limit.
And we're actually given, this is classic Diana Wynne Jones, the story already exists. If you know the story, you'll be able to unpick the puzzle here. We're given very early in the book, Kathleen reads to Sirius what the text calls a book of fairy tales, but is in fact a direct quote from the Mabinogion, which is the sort of collection of Welsh myths written down in about the 12th or 13th centuries. Of all the hounds he had seen in the world, he had seen no dogs the colour of these. The colour that was on them was a brilliant shining white, and their ears red. And as the exceeding whiteness of the dogs glittered, so glittered the exceeding redness of their ears. And that is a quotation from the first branch of the Mabinogi. But it is also a description of the dog body that Sirius has found himself in, with the red
and to
ears
talk a little bit
particular.
more about the dog body for a second before we move on to kind of the big, grand, mythic, epic finale. I do think there's a really interesting strain in this book of the various ways in which Sirius's dog body, which is a prison, but also important. The fact that it's half magic is important. The fact that it's a dog is important. There's various points in the book where, like he's running around trying to find the mythical artifact. It says his green nature became angry and bored. To his surprise, it was his dog nature that helped him here. It was used to being bored, and it seemed to be able to stick patiently to its work long after the luminary was howling with impatience. So this sort of like self-centeredness and unconcern that he has as a star is really mediated by the determination and the loyalty and the sort of understanding of what it is to live as a creature that he is imposed upon him by this dog's body.
Right, that sequence, I think the first moment when you kind of see Sirius as having redeeming qualities, honestly, is the moment when he comforts and helps and rescues Tibbles after she's been punished by Duffy for breaking a pot, or breaking several pots in the pottery shop. Which, by the way, the pots are always described as horrifically ugly, because Duffy is such an ugly person that everything she makes must be ugly as well. But the rescue of Tibbles is described as a combination of the Sirius's green self, his star self sense of justice, combined with a dog's hatred of strife in his family. And it's that combination of the sort of great and powerful and ethical star nature with the love that Sirius experiences as a dog that improves him, makes him better.
He, as a dog, he sort of learns, like we know that he already knows how to experience romantic love, possession, jealousy. He has that already from his relationship with his companion. As a dog, he does learn to love and protect and be loyal to not just Kathleen, but also Tibbles, the other two cats, Romulus and Remus, the other two boys. He actually does learn to have a strong affection for the other two kids.
But also lots of people just out and about town. As he's exploring, looking for the MacGuffin, the Zoe, he meets loads of people. He makes lots of friends with, like, kindly butchers, old men sitting on benches, a little old lady whose own dog has died and she really misses him.
Who immediately recognizes that Sirius is smart enough to understand what she's saying and is like, well, I'm pretty sure that you probably belong to some little girl who's going to be very sad if you don't come back. And Sirius, who has been intending, having first escaped, not to come back. He's like, I'm just making things worse by being there. I need to focus on this hunt for the Zoe. Has to go back because of these sort of chains of loyalty and chains of love that keep him attached to this family, even though it's by far in his best interest to just leave.
Absolutely. I think it might be a good time to talk about the final figure in the book.
Yes.
Because if we're talking about the mythic strand of the dog's body.
Yes.
So Sirius sort of, from very early on, it's become clear that there are these magical dogs out there and they are in some way connected to everything that's happening.
Yes.
That Sirius's own physical existence is down to the fact that one of these magical dogs jumped a fence and had puppies with a Labrador.
Yep. A very sweet Labrador. She's so nice.
Right. And eventually he does glimpse the dogs. He sees them out at night. And it becomes increasingly clear that there's nowhere that the Zoe can be except in the possession of the owner of these dogs, the master of the hunt.
Yes.
And the only way to get it is going to be to run with this hunt, which is the wild hunt of mythology, and its master is the otherworldly king of the underworld, who textually it's complicated what his actual name is, who he is. Earth calls him her dark child,
Right.
and his existence is hinted at by Sol early on,
Yes.
who warns Sirius that there are some dark and formidable things on Earth. By Earth, who is protecting her dark child.
Who can't
With
come
this
out.
very strong parental protective love, right?
Yes, and in this case, this is one where Earth is explicitly the protective parent of this child. Sol doesn't trust this child. This child can't interact with Sol. This is specifically a child of the darkness and the night.
Because he's a chthonic god!
Exactly.
Because he is, and it's not until the very end of the book the children who have read the stories meet this figure that they start putting names on him, and they say, "You're Arawn, aren't you?" And Arawn is the king of the underworld in Welsh myth.
Yes,
the king
but
of
they
Ilúden.
also name him as Orion and Actaeon, who are both sort of mythical hunters from Greek and Roman mythology. Actually, Orion in the Odyssey, I think, is Sirius's own master. They're linked, which is kind of a fun little joke. And they are also both figures who are torn apart by their own by the hunt, by Diana of the Hunt, by dogs, by Arawn's dogs.
And when Sirius runs with the hunt, it is one of these very Jonesian sort of mythic sequences where meaning is not totally clear, and the symbolism feels deep. And you have Sirius experiencing both being urged on to chase a stag, even though he's exhausted and miserable and everything hurts, he can't help wanting desperately to catch it. And at the same time knowing that the person who's urging him on, the huntsman, is also somehow the stag.
Yes.
And it is the huntsman that they're going to kill, and they're going to tear apart, and they're going to eat.
Yes.
And then he is going to still be there afterwards. And the symbolism, if you like, this is, I think, where it really comes down to. This is a book of death. The huntsman as a figure of the death giver, who is also the life giver. The huntsman especially in a pre-modern society where people are more connected to their food, your huntsman is literally going out there and getting you food is the reason you can live.
Yes.
But also is killing animals, and that sense of cruelty to animals as a great evil runs right through the book, and the death of the stag is intentionally horrific and upsetting.
Yes. And it is also this sense of death and rebirth, which we're about to see echoed just a couple pages later with Sirius. That, there's the sense that you have to hunt and become the hunted, that you have to die in order to become reborn. And Sirius has, throughout the whole book, been hunting the Zoe, this strange, mysterious thing. They find it, and immediately, because the kids and the other dogs and the kids, these sort of very mundane creatures that Sirius has bonded with throughout, that have nothing of the mythic about them except for the fact that they're associated with Sirius, and I guess for the other dogs, the fact that they're also they have this link to the hunt, but they're still, like, most of them are very stupid dogs. But it's these, by hanging on to the collars of these other sibling dogs, the kids are, enter this mythic space and immediately start arguing. And when they find the mythical artifact, the kids start arguing about the mythical artifact. And the one thing that Kathleen knows is that she can't let her dog touch the mythic artifact. It's dangerous. You don't let your dog touch dangerous things.
It's great, but it's also really striking that all these, like, mortal creatures, these creatures who are genuinely creatures of Earth, seem to understand what's going on better than Sirius does.
Orion,
they get it. Even the dogs get it better than Sirius does. It's explicitly stupid dogs, because Sirius's nature is opposed to everything that Arawn is.
Yes.
Sirius is, and this comes out at the end, that the Zoe is revealed to be like the force of life, if you like, the force of movement and motion in the universe. And Arawn says, well, then I can't use it because I'm the opposite of that.
Yes.
And Sirius, as a luminary who is presumably immortal, which is why the sentence to death in the beginning was so horrific, just has no concept of what Arawn is, or what the underworld is, what death is, in the way that all the children instantly know.
Yeah. And the children instantly know. And actually, side note, what is the John Peel joke? Do you know what that is? So
Oh, John Peel's. It's not. Man, it's not a joke. John Peel is, I think, 17th or 18th century huntsman in the north of England. Uh,
Oh,
he famous hunter. A friend of his wrote a song about him, which became a very, very, very famous hunting song. Do you ken John Peel?
that would do it. I
Um,
googled John Peel and I got a DJ from the 1960s and 70s. I was like,
that's a different guy. Probably. That's probably a different guy. If it's the same guy, I have questions for him.
that makes more sense. Thank you.
But yeah, the idea is that these mythic figures can be modern as well as ancient. That they're like ticking off Welsh mythology, Greek mythology, but then they're also saying, oh, it could be just like the figure from the folk song.
Right, and they all immediately know what each other. This is sort of again a thread in Diana Wynne Jones. Like the kids know, they're able to, as soon as they encounter the myths, they're able to recognize them, and they're able to understand what they mean, in a way that Sirius, as you said, can't. And then so we have the kids, and the kids see the Zoe. Iran offers the children gifts. The youngest kid, Robin, says that he wants one of the cold puppies and gets a cold puppy, which I'm sure is going to work out fine. The older bullying child, who's sort of, over the course of the book has come over more to Kathy's side. He's been fossil hunting. He wants a fossil. He thinks the Zoe is meteorite hunting. He thinks the Zoe is a meteorite. He wants that meteorite. He wants to show it off to his meteorite hunter friend. And
Sirius instantly like that would be a really bad idea because it's the Force and ultimate power. Don't give it to a small boy.
Give it to a mean small boy. Like, we come to have affection for Basil over the course of the book, but he's a mean small boy.
He is. I mean, well, no, he's explicitly like shown as imitating the behavior of the adults around him. Like both like the nastiness to Kathleen, which he gets from his mother, but also there's a scene later on where the two boys see Kathleen being bullied by a gang from school. With really, really horrible racist bullying. And these two stepbrothers are standing on the other side of the street watching and feeling awful and doing nothing about it. And then later on, it's Sirius who comes charging to the rescue. And then the police are called for because there's a dangerous dog. It's been attacking children. And it's the boys who have to speak up and say, that's not what happened. That's not why it happened. But Mr. Duffield, the father, says, well, why didn't you do anything about Kathleen being bullied?
They're like, we were on the other side of the street, so we couldn't do anything.
Yeah, but again, it's the imitating the parental behavior. They don't do anything because he never does anything.
Yeah, which, by the way, I meant to, this is going back a little bit to the politics, but I do think it's interesting that there's the whole scene with the policeman, where the policeman comes to take Sirius away for defending himself and defending Kathleen, and Sirius immediately has to make very nice and very stupid in order to get the policeman to go away. There's something, again, with the parallels with Kathleen and her father, there's, I think, something quite interesting there. But to go back to the end of the book, Kathleen wishes to understand her dog. She wishes that they can speak to each other. And Iran says, I think that's a bad idea. And Kathleen says, no, that's what I want. And he grants the wish. And right immediately following, they still can't speak to each other. And Kathleen is like, I was cheated. And Iran says, no, you don't know what you were asking for. And then we get to the final sequence.
Right, and Sirius takes the Zoe. And it turns out Kathleen was right. That thing is dangerous to dogs.
Yep. Some things dogs, a star can touch, but a dog can't. And sometimes you have to die to be reborn. And so having touched the Zoe, Sirius, he's found it. He's achieved the terms of his imprisonment. He's a star again.
And the dog's body dies.
Dead on the ground. Kathleen crying over it. And this, again, is a parallel to Kathleen's father, because in the middle of the book, Kathleen's father sends the letter saying he's coming to get her. Then we find out that he's escaped. And then right before this whole sequence, right before the big climax, we learn that he was actually killed in escaping.
Right. And Kathleen is discovered, he's been shot, and this triggers her actually to finally fight back against Duffy's cruelty and then to run away from home. And she doesn't have really a plan at all. And it's Sirius who's trying to find, a way for her to be happy.
Right.
A way for himself.
And it's this sort of awful bait and switch in the book, because you're led to believe as you're reading that, Sirius is thinking, okay, well, if her father can just come and get her, if we can find a better solution for Kathleen, I'll be able to leave, and I won't feel guilt about abandoning her because she'll be in a better place. She won't need me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then right before he's on the verge of achieving freedom, and he learns that this other freedom, that, you know, that Kathleen's freedom is never going to come.
Absolutely. It's really, really horrible. It's not in any way the only time that Diana Wynne Jones does this really quite strong downer ending.
Yeah.
We talked about it a bit with 8 Days of Luke, even the idea of looming tragedy, of the bad thing is coming. But in Dogsbody, I think it's particularly sad because in Sirius's moment of death and rebirth, as he transforms back into his luminary self, his star self, Kathleen looks up at him and they can talk to each other.
She's gotten her wish.
That's what she wished
for. But
she
doesn't want to anymore. It's, you know, they have this very distant, polite conversation where Sirius is...
It's so awkward.
So sad. And Sirius is trying to say, I'm alive, I was your dog. Look, and Kathleen says, I'm sure you're very nice.
I mean, she doesn't love a star. She loved her dog.
Right. And Sirius the dog was a combination of Sirius the star and the dog's body that he was in. We've seen over and over again throughout the book how this personality, this character that we've come to know, was a mix of his what they both call
he's a composite.
His green nature and his dog nature. And the dog is dead. He's just a star again. Now, it's not all a downer ending for Kathleen, because this little old lady that Sirius has befriended is like, well, I'm happy to take in a sad child who also loved this dog. So at least she doesn't have to stay with the awful abusive family anymore. But she's lost the two things that she loved most in the world. And when we end the book, and Sirius has gone back to his position, his place in the universe, and he doesn't have a companion.
His sphere.
Yes.
Yeah, and he keeps his companion sphere empty.
Yes. And he doesn't have... Yes, because he is hoping somehow that... Well, what does the book actually say? Hang on, let me find the quote. It's the last page of the book. Kathleen is looking at a new puppy, and she says to Miss Smith, the old lady who's adopted her, I was just thinking that Sirius needed me to look after him, whatever shape he was, only I didn't notice, because she's been his mother.
Oh, yes. Motherhood the whole time.
The whole time. And Miss Smith says, where there's need enough, a way can often be found. And then it says, Polaris often remarks to Sol these days that Sirius loses his temper much less often, but the one sure way to send him into a flaming rage is to suggest that he finds a new companion. Sirius will not hear of it. The small white sphere circling his goes untenanted because he hopes that what Miss Smith said is true. I don't hope that it's true, for the record.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a bad outcome, honestly.
Yes.
But yeah, no, this is interesting, because this is the book where I think Diana Wynne Jones is attempting to write about being heterosexual.
Yeah. And it seems like a bad idea.
It seems like a terrible idea. So it's mothers and fathers again and again. It's sex makes you stupid. It's caring for someone in a parental way, or it's failing to see someone properly because sex is making you stupid.
And this idea that romantic love in this book is both inextricable from this kind of parental love. They're all intertwined all the way through. Like there's no relationship that is not sort of tinged with this, and that it's about jealousy and possessiveness and keeping the thing that you love to yourself.
Right.
And I do want to...
Kathleen could have her very own father husband one day.
Oh, God.
To replace everything she's lost.
And there's this quote from Reflections that I want to pull out, that even though it's not directly about Dogsbody, but Diana Wynne Jones says, many of the stories, the myths, were unutterably sad, particularly those in which the gods took a hand. So much so that when I heard the saying, those whom the gods love die young, I thought that, though thoroughly unfair, it was probably a profound truth. This makes me very worried for David in 8 Days of Luke, and it also makes me very worried for Kathleen.
Actually, yeah. Honestly, I'm not sure how either David or Kathleen is ever going to survive, like, adolescence.
Yeah.
Growing up. You've got this jealous god looking over your shoulder.
Yeah. Protecting you? Question mark?
Protecting you, keeping you.
Yeah. It's like, on the surface, it's a hopeful ending, but I find it profoundly ominous.
Because Sirius is an ominous figure, honestly. I mean, he has he has changed through the book. He has improved. He loses his temper less often than he did. His dog nature has affected his star nature that much. He's become wiser, more able to understand kindness, more able to control himself and put up with boredom and impatience.
More able to form relationships that aren't this singular one romantic relationship that dominates his life.
But he still doesn't understand Earth's Dark Child. He didn't understand what he was doing to Kathleen by being so determined to become a star again. He was still fundamentally quite selfish.
Yeah,
it's a weird one, this book. It's a weird one.
Beautiful. It's like the whole ending sequence. I don't think we read out too many quotes from it because I didn't take that many quotes from it because it's just all of a piece, this incredibly gorgeous sequence that seemed a shame to isolate out bits. It's incredibly worth reading, but it's a very strange book.
It is. It is. I think this is actually the first book where I got really hit by, oh yeah, that's Diana Wynne Jones' prose.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've always admired her for, but it's becoming more visible as she gets more practice writing. And of course, she's written all these early books basically back to back in about 18 months,
and it's
2
in
years.
The 70s, which is also this, this period of time, I think, that's very, where the mythical and the numinous is really emerging in children's literature in a way that it hasn't necessarily before. This is
she's contemporary with what? Penelope Lively, Alan Garner,
Susan Cooper, Ursula K. Le Guin. I happened to be reading Tombs of Atuin right after I read this book, which is also about death and death gods and the underworld. And, there's something about children's publishing at this time that allows you to be deeply real about the wonders and horrors of the dark side of existence.
Yeah. And Jones talks in an early essay, or no, actually it's not that early, it must be from the 90s, because she's talking about writing for adults. And she says, I'm paraphrasing here, she thought that writing for adults, finally, after years of writing children's books, would be freeing. But instead she found she was expected to write in cliches more.
Yeah.
And that actually, because as a writer of children's books, she'd always written to be read out loud, she found herself taking that across to adults' books, even though adults are not necessarily reading out loud to themselves, because otherwise you ended up writing slop. Which I remember the first time I read that and I went, huh. And I do actually, we are both writers. I read out loud my own stuff when I write now.
Yeah.
And it does make a difference when you hear it. It really does.
Can I say, so I just had this thought right now. The other book that's published at the same time as this one is Susan Cooper's Greenwich, which is also about a strange, weird, dark child that's outside of the normal conflicts of the light, and that has a weird mystical object that is taken into possession of itself that the children have to quest after. That is exactly the same here.
I think this period is just when everybody is reading the Mabinogion.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff in here.
For kids.
There is some good stuff. I reread it this week and I'm like, yeah, this is good shit.
Yeah.
What was I saying? The prose. Now, I do want to just pull out one quote.
Yes.
All the stuff actually where she is writing about Sirius' experience of life as a dog.
Yeah.
She's got that classic Jones pacing where the first half, 2/3 of the book is remarkably slow and then the climax all happens at once. But it's slow because she is enjoying writing dog life.
Yes.
And it's great fun to read as well. And the scene where the puppy Sirius enters a meadow for the first time.
Oh my
and
God.
starts smelling things. And it's just beautiful, voluptuous sense. What was he looking for in all this glorious green plain? He was looking for something. He became more and more certain of that. This bush? No. This smelly lump then? No. What then? There was a scent beyond which was vaguely familiar. Perhaps it was that he was looking for. Sirius galloped, questing towards it with Kathleen in desperate pursuit, and skidded to a stop on the bank of the river. He knew it, this whelming brown thing. He dimly remembered, and his hair stood up slightly. But just that, firstly, really, really careful control of rhythm, like those short sentences, the long ones, the use of those questions, just a couple of word choices, voluptuous, whelming, and then that really humorous description of this is just how a dog runs around a field, right? I'm looking for something here. Any dog possibly is on a quest for the Zoe. You never know.
Entirely true.
But then when he runs to the river and he meets death, and he just stops.
Yeah.
Whelming brown thing where he nearly drowned as a puppy. It's like, it's gorgeous.
It's so good.
God,
And
she can write.
the integration of the like comedy of just what it, like I think we've perhaps made this book sound quite grim, but again,
it's so funny.
It's so
funny.
She's so good at writing from the perspective, like what it's like to have a dog. Anyone who's ever interacted with a dog will read this book and be like, oh yeah, that is, you know, if you put a god into a dog, that's how it would think. And it's just these extremely, you know, human recognizable moments of dogs doing dog things and being silly, and then you get these, you know, abrupt dramatic encounters with the numinous, with the mundane numinous, with death, which we all have to exist, you know, in the context of. It's just incredible.
And of course, like, a family pet often is one of the ways in which children come into contact with death early on.
Yeah.
And Kathleen's loss of her dog is that sort of moment of human understanding of this is something we all have to deal with. That thing that Sirius doesn't understand that all the children do. It is death.
Yes.
And he doesn't know part of Earth's existence on Earth is death.
And he's never had to deal with it before until this 1 year in the body of a dog. Should we call it there?
Let's call it there.
This has been 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones. We will be continuing with Diana Wynne Jones's works of the 70s throughout this season. And thanks for listening.
Yep. Thank you very much. Cart and Quitter next, I think.
Cart and Quitter next, yeah.
We're going to do Denmark.
Right. Yeah, we're going to do more about the Troubles.
Yep. Even more so, possibly.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop here.